become a sheep, but joined the local temple and died from lack of sleep. So the temple is driven by programs to keep the saints busy. Some temples, most of our movement is driven by charismatic leaders. So that works well as much as you have a charismatic leader. The problem is that charismatic leader, like everyone else, has to leave their body sooner or later. And then you have a vacuum. Or the charismatic leader is so charismatic, every problem comes to him. And on the weight of the problems, he disappears. Some temples are driven by events. It has to be the temple comes alive whenever there's a festival, and it goes back to sleep in between. But purpose-driven means that it's not driven by festival programs, charismatic leaders, finances, buildings. All these things are actually quite valuable when they're used in Krishna service with the idea of having a purpose to elevate people's consciousness. In other words, the festivals, the programs, the leadership, whatever else, the management, it only serves Krishna's purposes when it's actually elevating the devotee's consciousness. And we can define elevation of consciousness, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mama vaishasi satyam te pratijani priyosi me. And then he goes on, Sarva dharma prityaja mam ekam sharanam braja ahang kang sarvapapebhyo mokshisyami masuchaha. And the last instruction of Bhagavad Gita actually is idam te nada paskaya, well, beyond that, then he goes, Ya idam paramam bhukuyam mad bhaktesh abhidashtiti patimayi param gritva mam evaishati samshaya ichaz tasman manusheshu paschime priyakritamaha bhavita chaname tasmat anya kriyataro bhuvi. So next week we'll give a Sanskrit lesson. But the translation of these verses, it starts out by just bringing people in to hear about Krishna. We just want people to hear about Krishna. Ultimately, the idea is to convince them that Krishna is God. He's just not an ordinary cowherd boy. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore give people the means so they can actually become his devotee. What you're supposed to do, chant Hare Krishna, worship the deities, read these books, etc. Give people the inspiration, the knowledge, how they can understand who Krishna is. At first, people, including ourselves, we hear about Krishna with the idea that he might be the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore we theoretically accept that he's God, and theoretically accept that Prabhupada is his pure representative. That's why we read his books. And then when we give people the means, by hearing, by which they can experience what Krishna's like, that's called Mad Bhakta. They can try to, those who are come to the platform, they want to try to become Krishna's devotee and experience him. Because only by devotion, Krishna says, can one understand him at all. Otherwise, it's just theory. And then Madhyaji, when they understand how to become a devotee, then we engage in worship in small groups, maybe at home to begin with, and then maybe join a small group, regular group, and then in big worship groups, like in the temple for festivals and things like that, for inspiration. And namaskaru. And then gradually, one's heart becomes purified, one realizes that at least we're not God. We're not 100% Krishna. Sure, that Krishna is God. At least we find out that we're not God. For some people, that's where they drop off because they're quite disappointed. This is not why I joined this Hare Krishna movement, to find out I'm not God. It's an insult to God. And then if they go to that level, then Sarva Dharma Prachaja, then they find out there's a process called purification. And that purification means to become more and more dependent upon Krishna. Not sitting surrounded by fire and the summer months without drinking anything. That's purification too. But this is a much more important purification to become more and more dependent upon Krishna. And then to become dependent upon Krishna, we have to become less and less dependent upon things outside of Krishna, namely materialistic people. And then the result is that one develops the character of a pure devotee. Then one becomes inspired to go and give Krishna consciousness to others. So of course, this Krishna purpose-driven yatra depends really upon devotees who have the inspiration to take up organizing around that. In other words, there has to be a group of people or devotees who actually, at least to some degree, have recognized all those different levels. They may not be fully 100% convinced that Krishna is God or that Srila Prabhupada is a pure devotee, Mahabhagavad, and every word he says is absolutely perfect in the transcendental sense of the word, or that one should engage in worship, or even one's heart is not melted so that one always feels humble, or that one is on the platform of purification, becoming more and more dependent upon Krishna. I mean, these things are necessary, wanting to give up bad association, but some inspiration to help others become Krishna conscious as a means also for one personally to become Krishna conscious. Because Krishna says, there is no one more dear to me than one who takes up this mission. But in order to do that, fulfill Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's desire, Prabhupada mentioned that we need organization and intelligence. Organization means there has to be a group of devotees who have the ability to manage to some degree. And intelligence means they have to know what they're trying to manage, what they're trying to convey. Now, in our society, since Prabhupada was here, Prabhupada was a charismatic leader. As a matter of fact, most devotees didn't know why they were in the Hare Krishna movement. They understood there was nice food, so there were many prasadam devotees. And some of them liked the music. No one probably joined just to follow four principles. But they understood that there was faith in Prabhupada, not simply because Prabhupada was a great lecturer, which he was, because many devotees fell asleep when he gave a lecture. In Los Angeles, if you see the videos, you see all these devotees standing around Prabhupada. They weren't giving him a standing ovation, nor were they guarding him. They were the ones who fell asleep during class. And if you fell asleep in class, in LA, you were supposed to stand behind the Vyasa sign. And they're the ones who got to be in the videos. And Prabhupada didn't always cook, so it wasn't that devotees understood. Of course, I learned from Prabhupada's cook how to cook. That was one of my first services, how to cook. But most devotees didn't understand how good a cook Prabhupada was. But Prabhupada was, he brought the spiritual world with him. And even if devotees didn't have personal contact with him, practically speaking, those who had personal contact with him developed such faith in Prabhupada that inspired others to have faith in Prabhupada. Very rarely did anyone ever even think about criticizing Prabhupada or what he was doing. Therefore, the movement was more or less, when I joined in '68, we didn't have any books except for the original Srimad Bhagavatams, and no one read books at that time. What to speak of those Bhagavatams? As I said, I remember I was studying one day when in the temple. We didn't have a little preaching center, and my roommate, who also joined with me, he walked in and said, "What are you doing?" He got very angry. I was studying. What are you wasting your time reading these books for? And anyhow, devotees didn't understand the philosophy some, but the talk was always about Prabhupada. Well, Prabhupada did this, he said this. And generally Prabhupada just said we're not this body for most of these lectures, trying to convince us that there was some supreme soul somewhere and we're not this body. In any case, Prabhupada was very kind to the devotees. Kirtans were quite ecstatic. So he was a charismatic leader. Without that charisma, considering the situation that most of the people were in at that time, it would be very hard to get them out of the mode of ignorance. And naturally, those who surrounded him, I was seeing Prabhupada's series today, and one of them was Gaur Hari. Gaur Hari, he was living at a ranch near above Los Angeles. And in that ranch, there was a hippie ranch. And they were plowing the fields, he was growing potatoes. Prabhupada was invited to come up there and give a lecture. And half the people there were naked, because it was a hippie ranch. From there came Vishnu Jan Maharaj, if you ever heard of Vishnu Jan, Ramakrishna, Privati Nandana, and others. Gaur Hari. So Gaur Hari was naked and he was plowing the fields. It was
like above us.
What's that?
Like above us from.
I don't think there was very that's not why they were naked. They weren't going to go and bathe in any holy river that was around them. And then, in any case, Prabhupada walked into Gaur Hari, and he was naked, hoeing some potatoes. And he asked Gaur Hari, he said, what are you doing with you? What are you doing? He said, I'm plowing potatoes. He said, no, what are you doing with your life? So Prabhupada had such an impact that he gave a little lecture and chanted. And after that, because all the hippies got together once a day, or in the evening, they had a meal together. So at that time, after Prabhupada was there, they all chanted Hare Krishna before they ate. So out of that, Prabhupada's one visit to this ranch, you get the name of the ranch. Then many of them came to Los Angeles and joined the temple, especially because Prabhupada was a charismatic leader. Now, naturally, the devotees who followed Prabhupada, they thought that also they should be also charismatic leaders. And the problem with that is that when you're not completely purified, you may overestimate your actual potency. They may not have understood exactly, what Prabhupada's power was, what his transcendental potency is, because it was only realized in proportion to one's own consciousness. And one may be very expert at leading others, and very good manager or inspirational leader, but one may not necessarily be Krishna conscious. Napoleon was also a charismatic leader, but he wasn't leading people back to Godhead. So the result of that is somehow or another, by the arrangement of providence, just like the Gaudiya Math, our movement was divided, and it's still divided into different sections where we have different leaders with different ideas to some degree or another, one degree or another. Now, purpose-driven yatra means it's probably the most attractive Because the problem when you're being led by charismatic leaders, it's very hard to have a program for handing down to the next generation, succession. And that was the problem with the Gaudiya Math, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. He wanted a GBC to make sure we had disciplic succession. Matter of fact, Prabhupada once wrote to me, he said, "Thank you very much for this contribution of love." I sent him $50 for his book fund. And we're all working on the consecutive disciplic succession. That please study all my books, and somehow or another, and sometime afterwards, they'll have to help carry on the disciplic succession. So disciplic succession means not only reading the books, but assimilating them and understanding and seeing through them. Then, so that's called, first we have knowledge, then we have perspective, then we have conviction. Conviction means that we not only theoretically understand the knowledge, but we can actually see it. It's what our actual experience is. And therefore it leads to conviction because we apply it. And that conviction has to center around loving exchanges, because our conviction is that bhakti or love is actually the process of spiritual advancement. So the loving exchanges between the devotees, Sri Rupa Goswami has explained, is the very heart of spiritual advancement. Love to the devotees means also love to Krishna, love to devotees, and working together to help the innocent, and therefore become losing our taste for any bad association, unwanted, un-Krishna conscious association. Then from conviction, as it says, faith is something that you believe, conviction is something you would die for. So conviction is much more elevated. And then there's the development of skill. Skill means skillful, loving relationships. The vision of how to deal with individuals or groups in such a way as to convey loving service, inspire them for loving service to Krishna. That's skill. Transcendental discrimination and expertise. Transcendental discrimination, be able to discern who's on what level of spiritual advancement, and expertise, how to give them love for Krishna. Yari Deka Tari Kaha Krishna Upadesh, Amara Aga Guruhana Tari Desh. Whoever we meet, that our only business, we only have one business, which is to help them become Krishna conscious. We may have a husband, we may have a wife, we may have children, we may have friends, we may have enemies, we may have pets, whatever people we meet on the street. But our only business is to help them become Krishna conscious. In the background, whatever we're doing should always be that. I want to help them as a servant to the servant to the servant, make advancement in their relation to Krishna. It's the only purpose of this material existence, of this material universe, is to help people elevate themselves to Krishna consciousness. And if we acquire that skill and apply it, then gradually we become Krishna conscious ourselves. And the more we come under the internal energy, Daivi Prakritim Ashritya, then the more we develop the character of a pure devotee, like Srila Prabhupada. Because your energy is Ladini Shakti, which is Srimati Radharani's energy, and therefore we act as it says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, either as a personal associate of Srimati Radharani or as a manifested representative of Lord Nityananda under the internal energy. So that's the whole idea of the purpose-driven yatra, is to utilize all these different elements and utilize them for that purpose, to elevate people's consciousness through progressive stages, and to do it in an organized way, in an intelligent, conscious way. So, it kind of is, it's actually a little bit different from what we're used to. And those who have grown up in ISKCON since Prabhupada apparently disappeared, but probably never really left. But according to the model of charismatic leadership and individual zones, where we have individual inspirations and individual visions and whatever. Good neighbors make good fences make good neighbors, whatever. And there's some interchange, of course. Even in Europe, we have examples like the Hungarian farm. Devotees go there because it's inspirational. So we haven't built a wall around Slovenia, and the devotees can't get out. They only hear rumors about other temples, but no one really believes they exist. Only rumors. No, there's some interchange, but generally speaking, if you want to live peacefully in some zones, you have to go along with what they're doing there. If you want to fit in, which is all right, but actually, what we want to strive for, at least, is in some area or another, that even though there's devotees from different initiation, and they have different initiating gurus, they have come from different religions, they come from different countries sometimes, men and women, that we're focused on Krishna's original desire. That is, we're all working for the same thing, to help people become Krishna conscious. And therefore there's a certain amount of compromise, because obviously if we have different spiritual masters, especially, they're inspiring us because they have different vision, they have different skills, they have different qualities, they have different characters, etc. They're inspiring us in different ways, which is good, because a flower vase only looks nice when there's the variety. So it's good to have varieties, but there has to be a system that everyone finds their place, so that their inspiration and their abilities fit in synergistically, so that we're actually raising people's consciousness from the community to the crowd, to the congregation, to the committed, to the core. That everyone has the same idea, that we're trying to elevate people. And that whoever they are, we try to help them fit in and become inspired to serve in that particular level and come to a higher level. Therefore, there are so many ideas, there are so many ways of doing things. Just like if someone comes to the temple, to five questions, if we're talking to someone, we can ask ourselves, does this person feel like they fit in? They feel like if you're a Black person and you go to, in America, that was called the Ku Klux Klan. You ever heard of the Ku Klux? Very few Black people in America used to go to Ku Klux Klan meetings and feel like they fit in. Now, I used to go to Vidor, Texas. Vidor, Texas. I was a temple president of Houston, Texas, and Vidor, Texas is near Houston. So that was the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. I used to go there regularly and distribute Bhagavad Gitas. Not in a dhoti, though. Because they were very simple people. And if you weren't Black, you were right. So somewhere or another, we distributed a number of books there. But most Black people didn't join. Our Black devotees who joined didn't go with us. So one should feel like they belong, that there are other people like them. And they should feel that actually they're appreciated. People are happy they're there. Not that we only cooked enough for 50 people for the Sunday feast and 100 showed up and we're praying that at least 50 disappear. So we prolong the lecture until people get tired and they leave. Because they don't really feel like they really wanted it. every time they go up to get some prasadam, people give them a dirty look. No, they should feel like they're welcome, that we're happy that they're there. Therefore, in most Christian churches, even in the parking lot, when they greet people, the people who are greeting them have a very important responsibility to smile. Not that, oh my God, they gave me the most degraded, the most insignificant service, park cars, and to greet people. And people walk, they come, first thing they see is someone who's depressed. Welcome. This is really bliss. People go, my God. Welcome to the cult. Welcome. I remember the first time I joined the temple, I moved into the temple. We had a very small temple, and there were only a few devotees there, but there was only a few places to sleep. So I was sleeping in the temple room, very small temple room, half the size of this room here. And I turned to the devotee who moved in maybe a few weeks before I did. And I said, "Isn't it great we're living in the temple now?" And he turned to me right before he went to sleep. He said, "A lot of people came, a lot of people left." Well, the first time I went down to 26 Second Avenue, I went down with my sister and her friend to see Prabhupada, Swamiji. I walked into the temple, and there was one devotee in the temple. And I said, "Is Swamiji here?" He said, "No, he went to San Francisco. Come back some other time." Oh, I really felt good. Anyhow, people should feel like they're welcome. People are happy they're there. Welcome. You know, like when there was Krishna Das, there was Gop Kumar, and then finally his Swarup. And Gop Kumar came to the local Vrindavan finally, after going through all the planetary systems and all the Vaikuntha planets. Finally, he got to Goloka Vrindavan. And when Krishna saw us, Swarup, then that's eventually his name, Gop Kumar. When he saw Gop Kumar, he ran up to Gop Kumar and he embraced Gop Kumar. He was so ecstatic. Krishna himself, he fell unconscious, and the tears from his eyes were mudding the ground of Goloka Vrindavan. He was so in ecstasy, seeing his lost friend. And then when all the residents of Vrindavan, they were terrified that what happened to Krishna, he fainted. They thought maybe Gop Kumara was a magician sent by Kamsa to cast a spell on Krishna. So they're all lamenting. The birds fell out of the trees, crying, and the deers in the forest, they were all crying. Mother Jasoda ran in great anxiety, what happened to Krishna, and Gop Kumar was at the feet of Krishna. He didn't know what was going on. And then Balaram came running also, and he saw his brother fainted, unconscious, and he was in great anxiety also. And then he figured out what had happened, that Krishna had met Gop Kumar, and he was so ecstatic to see him that he fainted out of ecstasy, out of loving ecstasy. So he took Gop Kumar and he put his hands around Krishna's neck, and he said, tell Gop Kumar to whisper in Krishna's ear to wake up. And when Krishna heard Gop Kumar's voice, he became conscious. And then he was so ecstatic in love to see his friend that he kissed him. And then Mother Jasoda realized that actually Gop Kumar was his friend. Actually, Krishna had said his name. His name was Swarup, the brother of Sudama, the brother of Srimati Radharani. Krishna's friend in Goloka Vrindavan had returned, so Krishna was so ecstatic. So we should feel something like that when someone comes to the temple. Not that, what are you doing here? I don't know, they told me to come here. I've been lost for this time more. This go home. Home. I just came from home. I thought this is my home. We don't have enough room here for you and me. No, we should actually make people feel that this is their home. They finally came home. And people should understand that whatever abilities, whatever talents, whatever inspiration, somehow or another, we can find some place for them here. They engage those talents and abilities, their inspiration. Then they should also know what their obligations are. It's not that this is a hippie hangout, that you come here and you eat and sleep and you chant, you don't do any service. They should know what they're here for. As Prabhupada used to say, different things like, temples are not for crazies and lazies. It's a place for dropping books raining from the sky on the conditioned souls. Like in warfare, they drop bombs and bullets, so we drop books. So it's a place for developing Krishna consciousness and giving it to others. And at the same time, once you know what the benefit is, that they're going to get pure association, they're going to get knowledge of their eternal relation with Krishna, they're going to get things here that they can't get anywhere else. So they should consider it a great honor and a privilege to be in the temple, even to come to the temple. So those 5 things, these are some of the things that we should be trained, anyone should be trained, that when people come, they should feel that they belong here, that there's other people like them here, that they're welcomed here, they have something to do here, they have some purpose they can fulfill here, the higher purpose. They know what their obligations are and they know what to expect in return. So these are some of the visions that those who are engaged in purpose-driven yatra, some of the tools that can be utilized to help develop people's consciousness, develop our consciousness, so that we actually, when we're engaging people on different levels, this is more or less bringing people from the level of simply being part of the crowd to bring them part of the congregation to become a member. We know what tools to utilize to help people come from one level of consciousness to the next. And we all have we all know the same tools, and we're all working with them according to our inspiration, according to our advancement, according to how it's organized, so that we can work together cooperatively, not trying to become something that we're not, trying to become who we actually are, that is the servant of Krishna. And if we utilize whatever talents and inspiration we have together in the Sankirtan movement, then the result is that we'll actually find out who we are. We'll actually find out what our eternal role is. If we just take up the proper role in this lifetime, then we'll find out what our eternal role is in the spiritual world is. So that's just some idea. As far as the details, I think we have to go over an outline of the process. Generally speaking, even what we did at the beginning, what we did a couple of years ago, it's almost a couple of years ago now, we took a chapter from Purpose-Driven Yatra, from Purpose-Driven Church by Rick Warren, and everyone studied each chapter, and someone would give a summary the next week on that chapter. And that way we went through 18 chapters. But we didn't really get into applying it. Other things came up. But at least we had the background knowledge. And of course, unless you utilize something, unless you review it, the tendency is to forget it after some time. And even in Rick Warren, when he has his church, it's not like they go through the purpose-driven church and then they forget it. Now he does it whole year round. He has seminars and they're in different aspects. He's reviewing it and expounding on it and applying it, whatever. So their consciousness is like fixed on it. Now they don't have the philosophy that we have to apply it with. In other words, they don't know about karma. They don't know about reincarnation. They don't know who God is. but they're enormously successful because they take people for where they're at and they bring them to the next level. They know how to do it expertly. Now, when they come to the platform of character, those who are actually when they go through the process of coming, for instance, from knowledge to perspective, conviction to skill to character, they develop character. They develop, a spiritual character, but it wouldn't be on the same level as, say, Srila Prabhupada, because they don't know the name, form, quality, and pastimes of Krishna. They don't know actually how to live life in such a way as to be completely spiritual. So we have an advantage. We have the holy names. We know the potency of the holy name. We know the potency of Prabhupada's books. We know something about the potency of deity worship. We have certain tools that they don't have. But this helps us apply those tools that we have in a way which is just more effective, which is in line completely with any bona fide scripture also. Bring people in, tell them about Krishna, train them up, train them to do some service, and then send them out to help others become Krishna conscious too. It's just a natural progression from one stage to the next. So what I think what I'm planning to do is we have those devotees who are already experienced, have some knowledge of this process, whatever. Then, as Sachi Devi Dasi suggested, to form some kind of group so we can discuss it, how to apply these things. But one has to actually have some background. Otherwise, the tendency is, we have this whole process and we don't know exactly where to first apply it to actually get some results. Because without results, it's boring. If you go too broad and try to do everything at once, you accomplish nothing because it's impossible. And if you get too specific and you leave out devotees who actually who are on different levels, then it also becomes ineffective. And you're limiting it. So you can't get too broad and you can't get too specific. You have to see what's appropriate. So that, I think, the first thing is organizational scan, see what's existing now in Slovenia, in Ljubljana specifically. What is our first stage? How to bring devotees to the temple, get them trained up in the Bhakti program, get the temple together so it becomes a welcome place for newcomers new people to come, get the congregation together so that they can be the devotees in the congregation, those who are inspired, have home programs every day, regularly, and they meet in small groups for personal direction, and then they come together for the festivals for inspiration. And that there is some kind of unity, that we give up this idea that my main relationship is with my initiating guru, but my main relationship may be with my initiating guru, who's follower Srila Prabhupada, in so much that he's inspiring me how to serve all the other devotees. If my guru is actually inspirational to me and he's inspiring me and training me how to serve all the other devotees, then that's very nice. Then my relation with the guru will become very fruitful. Because that was Prabhupada. That's why he inspired. He was selfless. He wasn't International Society for Prabhupada Consciousness. He was International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And because Prabhupada was selfless, distributing Krishna consciousness, therefore, the society is intimately connected with Prabhupada also. Everyone is intimately connected to him because he purely was helping everyone revive their relation with Krishna. Not with him personally or only with him, but with Krishna and therefore with everyone else simultaneously. So I think our next stage is to try and figure out how we're going to have some kind of small groups to meet, smaller groups to work on the different aspects of just to find out, first of all, what we have already and how to utilize it properly. Any questions? Comments? Yes.
Thinking something about I totally agree that a leader is only charismatic, that it will not end in the long run. So there has to be some system along with the personality speaking. And I'm thinking, in Prabhupada's case, his charisma was not a sense of material charisma. It was the spiritual effulgence which he brought with him. We are speaking about spiritual charisma.
Yeah.
So there is material charisma which can be useful, but we should not work only around the charisma. And then there is charisma which comes from the nature of a person. For example, if you have a leader, if you have a natural person who's by nature a leader, you'll have a charisma with it that comes with nature. So actually, this kind of charisma is wanted, is needed, and we should look for it. For people who have this natural charisma, that means that they have natural capabilities of leading also. Is it?
Yeah, well, Prabhupada he was expert at that.
Yeah, he was expert also in managing
And
also,
engaging all kinds of different people in Christian service. Not only trying to get them together, but knowing when to keep them apart too.
yeah, sometimes you have to be.
Yes.
That's how it is.
Yeah, Prabhupada, he was a good enough instrument that he knew he was able to engage relatively very powerful devotees in different ways.
Yeah, he was.
And as we could see, in his absence, they sometimes got themselves into difficulty because they overestimated their position. They thought they had become powerful, but actually it was Prabhupada's association that they were already potentially powerful, and with his association that brought them up down from where they had potential, and he brought them up. But then when he left, they didn't realize how much they were dependent upon Prabhupada, and therefore they thought themselves powerful independently. And then, pride cometh before the fall.
Yes. What about Ripur? Is he a charismatic person?
I never met him. I don't know. You can see by his lectures, he's a good speaker. From his material karma, he's materialist. I mean, you have your karma. Like for instance, his mentor was, what was his very famous? Was that? No, he's a very famous preacher and most famous Christian Baptist preacher. I forget his name. Extremely amazing karma he had.
Oh, probably he was predestined to
Yeah.
success.
But at the same time, he had he utilized in God's service, Christian service. So he had, and we could see that many of the same things that Prabhupada, or the principles they applied, mentorship. Like for instance, what was the name of his probably most famous Baptist preacher that ever was alive?
Still what?
What's that?
Stephen Covey?
No, much more. He had it. Like his mentor would never be alone with a woman, for instance. And he always surrounded himself with persons who had more talent in different areas than he had.
He surrounded himself with
He made a team.
made a team.
He made his mentor made a team of his friends and they went to, but they were all talented. One was an expert musician, the other one was, expert manager. He formed a team. He didn't try to do it himself.
He was like a selector, like a football team.
Yeah.
Selector.
He was like a good coach.
It's very important.
And then Rick Warren took the same, he learned from him. He had expert mentors. Matter of fact, the whole book is more an assimilation of all the different mentors he got. Management for, I forget, Paul Drucka, whatever, and his spiritual from this other charismatic preacher. One time his mentor gave a lecture to 1 billion people about consciousness. On this is like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So, you know, he had certain principles he followed, and he came from a family who had a ancestry of preachers. So he took birth in that family, and he, from his early age, that was what inspired him. That was his heroes, all these different Christian preachers, and therefore he was determined. He married a woman who was also came from a family of preachers, and therefore he was able to concentrate. He wanted to, that was his hero. It's just like in India, people grow up, they want to become an acharya. In the West, they want to become a rock star.
Yeah.
So if you grow up in a certain family, you have a certain tradition, you take birth in that family, you're probably, you know, you spend lifetimes developing that consciousness so that you're much more likely to fulfill it. Now, we ourselves, even we have our gurukuls, the devotees take birth in devotee families, but because the families they didn't come from a disciplined succession of families. Their fathers, mothers weren't really that fixed in developing God consciousness usually. Therefore, their upbringing, because, for instance, in astrology, if you want to find out if someone's going to have a successful marriage, usually, if you want to make it simple, you just look at their sun and moon, or the 9th house and the 4th house. Then you can find out what their fathers and mothers are like. Because if they had good upbringing from their father and mother, a stable family, then they're much more likely to have, you know, understand how to have a stable family life themselves. If they don't learn in the course of time, they don't get good association. But just by how they were taught from their childhood. Like my mother and family stayed together their whole life. Because I got married once. It only lasted 2 weeks. And I never found out my wife's name. I went on bookish usually. But my wife, I never got legally married, it was just a fire second. But anyhow, my wife was looking for something other than hearing the Bhagavad Gita. Didn't work out. Anyhow, my family was, you know, there was no one that I knew of in my ancestry who ever got divorced. We didn't, well, there was one. It was one of my cousins got divorced. They married someone called Barbara Streisand, if you ever heard of her. What's that? Yeah, singer. So he became my cousin, but then they got divorced. We lost that change already. That was the only one in our family where we got divorced. But anyhow, that's life in Kali Yuga. Now, if you stayed married for 20 years, you're lucky, especially if it's the same person. I've been married for 20 years to 5 different people.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, what does it take? You know, he was born with this kind of chart, with this agenda, with these lives, you know, to succeed. And who are we here to succeed in this level?
Well, we're here.
we can copy some of the principles, we can copy which are useful.
Well, we have the holy name. If we actually, Prabhupada left, and most of us had no idea what was going on in terms of, you know, I was in the movement I joined the movement when I was 19, and Prabhupada left in I joined in 68, and Prabhupada left in 77. So I was one of the most senior devotees in the movement at that time, which means I had been in the movement for a total of 9 years. And I read the books, but I didn't really have that much experience. I never had the only job I had was just, I had a job when I was in college, during the summer, but I had no experience in the world.
Yeah, we have spiritual, we have the holy name of
holy
more than
name.
50 years. We distributed so much books, and yet people are not come. They're not interested.
Well, the books itself is not going to bring people. It sows the seeds. What will bring people is when we have a loving family here. When people are actually faithful, that we actually have something good to offer the people. And it's vibrant. It's shown in the relationship, not only when the people come, but with each other. And people think that this is something I would be interested in. It's like my cousin. I have a cousin he's who I grew up with. He got his PhD in IT. He was a professor at Columbia University in IT at that time. He was the head of the department. So I went to visit him one time when I was in Brooklyn. I actually got locked out of my room. So I couldn't put on any army clothes. I came with someone else's dhoti on. And I didn't have any ID, but somehow or another they let me in to see him. We were talking and he told me, he said that he obviously understood I was a member of the Hare Krishna movement. He said, you people, he said that actually at least what you have is community. He was appreciative of that we had a community. Because that's something a lot of people don't have. They lack actually having a community. So the strength of our community is what really attracts people. Even you have no philosophy, you don't know what you're doing, hardly. But if you have a strong community, like for instance, the Mormons, then it really attracts people because they feel even the Christians, when they go to a foreign place, foreign country, and they give people jobs and they give them, wives, and they give them some food and loans, then people join this. They feel like they're actually getting some security. It's a community.
They have a strong economy. Mormons.
Yeah. So that's why we have such great philosophy. We know everything. But the thing is how to apply it in such a way as to actually become devotees.
We don't know it.
What's that?
Somehow we don't know it.
Yeah, we have all the theoretical knowledge, but as far as loving exchanges with each other, it's something we have to develop more.
Yeah.
Yes.
You said we should be put in smaller groups now to bring something.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Like this will be the next step.
Well, one of the things, a congregation,
Huh?
on the level of congregation, you go from the community to the crowd to the congregation. One of the things in the congregation is like Namhata groups, or what are they had different names for it, Namhata. Because when you have, not everyone's going to be able to come to the temple every day. But if you have regular engagements in a smaller group where you give personal attention and then you discuss service, you discuss your sadhana, you discuss, for instance, there you can discuss your household problems, with people of like-minded devotees. So
I understood that this was for, implementing for the end.
sometimes, that has to be organized. Because not everyone lives in the same area, everyone's more convenient. We have like-minded devotees getting together in groups. And then, of course, later on, if we develop ministries, services, then also people get the association of other devotees when they're engaged in similar services together.
So the Buddha was saying, how can we put this into practice? The way I see it is that we have to just cooperate, and we also have to assess, what we have, like what we can do, which people we have can do things, and then we have to connect them, to make this whole circle out of 5 things.
Yeah, sure.
appoint.
Because for now we have community, I don't know. We have community, but everyone is working for his own goal. And purpose is almost the same, but the goal is different, and we are not connected. Everyone works for himself, and if we would have the purpose would be that we bring people from the crowd to silence.
Those things, community, the crowd, the congregation, committed to core.
Core. If this would be our purpose in the whole community, then we would have to connect and see how, transfer people from one to another.
By education, in other words, along with, it has to be defined commitments, and in order to get to that commitment, you need a system of education. Not just theoretical, but just practical education, theoretical and applied.
But then it's not the problem. I don't see problem in the process. I see the problem in not connecting, the people don't go from one, like now I was taking care of you for some time, but I'm in this first working group. I just brought you here. Now there will be someone who will take care of you, then there will be someone who will educate you, and then we will engage you,
Yeah, sure.
This, it's not linked, it's not connected.
Yeah, well, it's not clear. I mean, you need, well, at first, you have to see, like, for instance, our natural position is you go from brahmachari life to grihastha life to vanaprastha to sannyas. But first, you have to have brahmacharis and brahmacharinis and train them to become good grihasthas. Now, if you already have grihasthas who haven't been trained as brahmacharis and brahmacharinis, then maybe you have to train the grihasthas to be how to properly, see things as a brahmacharini or brahmachari is trained up, who's going to become a prospective householder. If you try to progress someone who hasn't made it in household life to vanaprastha life, then or sannyas, as we can see, that if the proper training isn't there, they usually go back to grihastha life because they weren't fulfilled in grihastha life. They're not going to become a good vanaprastha or sannyasi. So we have to see our congregation, if they actually got trained up properly in becoming part of the crowd, so that they actually made that commitment to become part of the congregation based upon their positive experience at hearing and chanting about Krishna and doing sadhana bhakti, etc. Otherwise, then you have to deal with the congregation as if they were actually, some of them as if they were actually just part of the crowd, because they're really not, committed to the process. So that takes some discrimination, some expertise. Now, that's the trick, is because if you think you're part of the congregation, your activities are really that of the community or the crowd, then you have to be very diplomatic dealing with them, because they might become very disturbed if you start giving them some designation. Like actually, so it takes some expertise of how to deal with people too. They don't become discouraged. And at the same time, they get some idea of what they need and actually to fill their lives with more Krishna consciousness. So we don't, internally we may use, we explain, community, crowd, congregation, committed, core, etc. But, how to practically deal with it at the beginning, especially dealing with topics like what does it mean to become part of the congregation? What kind of commitment do you have to do? What kind of education should you have? So that when you meet in small groups, you don't discuss, what grade your child got at school or something. Actually, it's focused around Krishna consciousness. The small groups are not, it's like sometimes you go to a temple and our Indian congregation is there and they're in the back, they're gossiping during the lecture. And still we consider them part of our congregation because they give donations. And to a certain extent, they made some commitment because they're giving donation, but philosophically, they're someplace else. So this has to be worked out. That's the tricky thing, because we're not starting from the beginning, we're starting from a very mixed, and actually how to separate it and figure out how to get people to fit into different categories so we can help them progress was the highest goal. At the same time, if you try to get everyone on board without recognizing what their limitations are, we develop conflicts and disappointment. Like I have trying to deal with my disciples sometimes. You know, you have this imagination that they're all devotees and they're all serious, but actually most of them have joined because, you know, they're looking for a husband, or they're looking for some security, whatever. And you try to get them into sadhana bhakti. You try to, pressure them to, but that's not their interest. They're not. And therefore, instead of helping them, you simply get in conflict with them. But then we have people living in the temple like that, because we haven't really been able to discriminate and how to engage people properly. So these devotees like that, you give them lectures on how to find a husband, they'll attend every meeting. And if you give them lectures about renunciation.
We need also this.
Yeah, you need both. You need both.
Otherwise, we get bad couples.
Yeah, you need both. You have to know who you're dealing with and what their interests are, why they come, and then you train them accordingly. But we're just like trying to fulfill the deity roster and trying to cook the bhoga for the deities and clean the temple, and this kind of discrimination is sometimes lacking because we're just pressed all the time. Service. Since Prabhupada left practically. I mean, when Prabhupada left, I remember when I went to Poland the first time in 1990. I mean, it was just amazing. There were so many temples, and you couldn't find a place to sleep because everyone was sleeping on the floor. The whole temple was filled with devotees sleeping. There's so many devotees in the temple. Now, if you go to most of our temples, they don't have a problem. Of course, they do have a problem now because of the refugees coming through Ukraine or whatever. But, it's certainly not what it was before, because they came out for different reasons. We didn't know how to handle them, and they left for different reasons. So we usually don't have too many devotees in the temple. Most of our temples don't have enough. And we don't really know how to engage them in such a way, is that if they're on their way to become a grihasta, then they should be trained like that. So they become the best grihasta they could possibly be. If they're on their way to become a preacher, we should train them like that, so they become the best possible preacher. So that takes some expertise to do that. Anything else? Yes.
Maybe it's this kind of person who have this ability to see what somebody is for what's his needs, what's his wishes. You can see it, you can see it in your disciples.
Well, everyone sees it everyone sees that. Anyone who has a brain can see that, but how to refine it. Because every time we meet someone, we're analyzing them. It's just normal. It's an automatic thing.
Not everybody.
What's that?
Not everybody.
Not to the same degree.
Brain.
Not to a lot of times we get it wrong. But there should be some devotees, or a group of devotees usually, who discuss these things. Because if we have the right group of devotees who see things from different points of view, then they can try to engage devotees and see what the results are. We may not get it right all the time, but we generally get a lot of good feedback when people are engaged in their service. We can see if they're happy, if they're coming to the program, if they're actually having nice relationships with the other devotees. These things become obvious that they're, and if you have to force them to come to the program, they're always arguing with the devotees, they seem depressed, then they're on the wrong track. Something's wrong. is not going to last. Yes.
So there is a big chance that our mind completely mislead us, actually. And, would it be maybe interesting to start build up this story from the scratch? Because when you have a big strategy on the high level, you cannot grasp it because through the process you will get there. Otherwise, you have these big ideas, but
No,
the
you
ground
start.
is still a lot of.
Yeah, you have to start on the ground. Yeah, this big idea. You have to have what your goal is. We're trying to develop the character of a pure devotee, but you have to start from reality.
So that if you're somewhere in the middle of the process, like thinking we are here, but actually we should make.
Well, we may have to start, in general, if we're organizing the society, we have to build up from the bottom and bring them up. We have to start with, bringing new people in and training them up.
So are we?
That always will be there because it's a big world out there with a lot of potential people to bring them in, build them up, engage them and then send them out. So it's always going to be there. But right now in Slovenia, we're not overwhelmed with people who are being trained up. So we have to start there. And then when we get sufficient people who are trained up, then you can start bringing them up. Out of those, some of them will be attracted to go to a higher level. And of those who've gone to a higher level, some will be attracted to go still a higher level. So it's like you could say it's like a funnel. Not everyone who goes in comes up from the bottom. Not everyone, just select people will come up and up. Some of them will come, but much more than now. Yes.
I think what ISKCON is lacking, which Prabhupada said we have to do, which is the 50%, which is one ashram dharma, is profiling. I think we need to start profiling people according to
Yeah.
four
Well, we're doing that already.
natures. And at least, of course, Kali will not find the perfect pure Brahmana, pure Kshatriya, and so on. But at least you can extract some people which clearly show the nature, manager of a Brahminical person, Aisha type. We have to start profiling and direct people according to their nature, give them positions according to the nature.
Well, yeah, but it's right now, I think the necessity is the preaching movement, engaging people in the preaching movement, so that eventually we can actually have a farm and things like that.
No,
It's for preaching.
for preaching.
Yeah. Well, that's what Prabhupada says in Nectar in the Srimad Bhagavatam.
For example, Slovenian Yatra, it's a small Yatra, but still you need a manager, you need somebody who coordinates stuff, who will manage Namahatas, Sanghas, and so on.
Yeah,
Somebody
yeah, of course.
like shut.
Yeah,
Then you
the
need-
person has to have it,
Did you ever read Srimad Bhagavatam 135?
which says,
Which says exactly that. It probably writes that if have the tendency to want to preach and to learn and instruct, then you should utilize that in Krishna service. But don't try to become Krishna. Don't try to think that you become Krishna just because you're preaching, because you have some knowledge. And if you have some ability to manage like Arjuna and fight for Krishna's cause, and at the beginning Arjuna, the great warrior, didn't want to fight, but after hearing the instructions, then he decided to fight for Krishna. And if you have the ability to get resources, if you're a farmer or an industrialist, you utilize that energy in Krishna's service. But then after all, Prabhupada said, the best thing after all is to hear and chant about Krishna. But in the absence of such a tendency, in which you utilize all one's energies in Krishna's service, and that way gradually develop a tendency to want to hear and chant about Krishna.
yeah, that's why diving Varnashas.
Yeah, that's 1535 on Bhagavatam.
That's diving, that's okay, but still, we should select people according to their nature.
Yeah, that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's the whole idea. Yeah, that's why Prabhupada was so successful, because Krishna gave him the intelligence, because Krishna was directing, and Krishna knew perfectly. And Prabhupada did perfectly engage people according to their nature.
Then people become charismatic.
Yeah, because this nature, which I said before, they have this nature. And if you put them in proper position, they will
Flourish.
flourish.
Yeah, they become,
And people will follow them because they are happy, they are effulgent, they are inspired. It's simple psychology.
yeah, well, they become inspired from within by the internal energy.
Also,
They become, I mean, the devotees I joined the movement with, I didn't think they were so charismatic until they actually engaged in devotional service.
yeah,
And became, 5 of them became sannyasis, 4 of them became GBCs. So, you know, they became empowered because they, by Prabhupada's mercy and by his instructions and inspiration,
and
they came under the internal energy.
they stay there in these positions if they have the nature, otherwise they don't stay.
Yeah.
So we have to plan in the long run. Select among the devotees who are coming out to such meetings or even interested a little bit theoretically in management, then you have to profile them. Who's more Brahminical, who's more Kshatriya, who's more this, and engage them.
Yeah. Some tendency, and also,
You say engagement, who will engage? I'm sure there are people. who
Because
want
you
to-
see,
the GBC, the temple president,
he gives the
I remember the temple commander, someone comes, he asks them to watch the pots. Someone becomes the head pujari, they engage in, you know, the people will naturally, there's so many services to do. Cooking, cleaning, deity worship, book distribution, managing, there's so many, not only the GBC. I mean, ideally, the GBC is inspirational. And we make sure that everything that one is doing is directed towards the same goal, to become Krishna conscious, spread it. But it's so many devotees, they had to be taught how to engage others who naturally gravitate. Some people are going to naturally gravitate towards the deities, some to construction, some, you know, book distribution, some harinam. People naturally graduate. And there'll be leaders in every one of those things. All right, so, yes, one more.
No, it's not so good, but all right, I don't know. But if we compare this with, I don't know, I wasn't at that time that was Prabhupada, but when Prabhupada was there, when you and Prabhupada it was like Prabhupada gave instructions and devotees his agency. The disciples were executing everything according to his
Not
real
really.
knowledge.
Not really. It didn't work out.
They have discussions like this.
Oh, I mean, well, first of all, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have telephones in the beginning. We had nothing. Once a month or something, we heard, my temple president had a conversation with Brahmananda, who was traveling with Prabhupada. We got a little information. Most of it was done locally. There was no instructions from Prabhupada. We got a tape sometimes once a month from Golden Avatar with a lecture from Prabhupada. So but we heard about Prabhupada and things like that. We understood generally. And the leadership that we had senior devotees who were leading us. And according to their understanding, we kind of try to follow. I mean, considering not all pure devotees joined the movement. Not everyone who joined the movement was a pure devotee. They tried to follow. And some of them became more serious than others. So it wasn't like, you know, every Prabhupada was the whole world was just full of his effulgence and everyone just fell into line. They kind of like, by some misunderstanding, they understood what Prabhupada wanted. I mean, most of them had no idea what was going on. But they were inspired because, you know, the whole movement had nothing else to do but engage in devotional service. There wasn't, you know, no one was trying to make disciples for themselves. No one was trying to do anything for themselves because you didn't join the movement to do that. There was nothing to gain except for you got an opportunity to do some service. Maybe you became a temple president. I mean, I don't know what you got from the temple being. Maybe you became, I don't know, at some point you became a sannyasi and you got the Maha plate if you were in a temple. But you didn't get anyone, you know, personal followers generally. You didn't get any money. You didn't get anything. You got a lot of service. That's all. And therefore, people who joined the movement, you know, even if they didn't know what was going on, they knew they had to do service. Otherwise, they after some time they left. there's nothing else to do. Now you can get so much, personal gain, you can get followers, you can get, it's like a career path in some places. You get insurance, you get this, you get that. So there may be some other reasons why people join. But anyhow, also people join because some people join because they know there's a path back to Godhead. But this idea that everything was perfect back then and now it's something different. No, it's also part of our learning experience now. Yes.
Now this seminar is finished.
I hope not.
No. It's so part now. So I would like to know what is the next step.
Next step is, I guess, to discuss how we're going to get into applying it. And those who want to apply it. In other words, I guess we have to have a meeting. Everyone's available.
So you will announce when the next.
Yeah, we have to.
Like this, okay.
And then to see, what the sequence is. I mean, generally you have to do an organizational scan. And as he said, you have to start from the very beginning. See who's actually want to participate in in a simple but clear program. It has to be very simple, but it has to be very clear. And then we have to find out who wants to participate and let them participate, see what the results are.
Can karmic CVs also help with this process?
What's that?
CV, curriculum vitae.
Everything could help. Those are also nice. As long as it's not too elaborate, so you don't have time to read it. I mean, to give an example of that, which is my last example for Rian. In the sannyas ministry, which I've been doing I became the sannyas minister in 1992. Before that, I had spent 4 or 5 years. Well, I guess I was a minister too, but not as a ministry. So since then, for instance, we've gone through different phases of experience. One of the phases of experience, which we're still doing, assessing the candidates, is to get feedback from multiple sources. So to do that, we set up a website and people could just feed into the website and they give feedback from every place in the world, practically speaking, where a sannyas candidate would visit. And we had them visit all places all over the world. And then the people at least we got 50 people, devotees, giving feedback on each candidate. But especially in certain places in the world like India, no one was ever trained to give feedback. And therefore, we learned what the culture in India is, that if you have someone who's more senior than you, you don't criticize them, no matter what they do. And therefore, we got the same feedback from everyone. Thousands of feedbacks. This devotee is a pure devotee, he's my Shiksha guru, et cetera, et cetera. And then sometimes we get 50 to 100 feedbacks, 50 usually, on a candidate. And then the senior devotee they travel with, because we didn't trust just people giving us that kind of feedback. One time they wrote to us and they said, this is a senior devotee, sannyasi who they traveled with for 2 weeks. And we got feedback from this candidate, this person is a pure devotee, he should take sannyas immediately. And then the senior devotee wrote back to us, this devotee is completely unqualified to take sannyas. So, and when we had a judge, to read the feedback, when you're reading for each candidate, when you have 30 candidates or 40 candidates, and you have to read 50 to 100 feedbacks, and they're all saying the same thing. Oh my God. And then one person says, the most senior person says this person has a lot of difficulties, maybe you can reconsider what he's going to be doing. One time we got from 3 devotees assessing the same candidate, exactly the same feedback, word for word. These are things that, 50 questions are answering, a lot of questions. And, what qualities have you found that are exemplary and how have they displayed it? And three devotees from the same yatra wrote exactly the same feedback, word for word. Yeah, so we have to be intelligent too, what kind of assessment, how deep an assessment we want to get into. And what we has to be useful, otherwise it's tiresome to try to assess people. I mean, I found a lot of times you just get to know them, like what we do nowadays, we just interview people. We just don't do that, but that's one of the main things. Like the last time we met was on yesterday. We had three sannyas candidates giving us a 15-minute lecture, each one of them. On a certain topic, we give them three topics, and they give us a topic on one, and sometimes we ask questions at the end. We get to know them by talking to them and hearing from them.
We had one devotee here who wanted sannyas. So Ananta Prabhu engaged us to talk to him. And if regarding whether he should marry or take sannyas, the grihastas are the best, to talk with sannyas candidate.
Or if you want to know if this person is a brahmachari, just ask Mother. You will know.
Brahmastra. Brahmastra is.
So weapon.
No, it's a cross between a brahmachari and a grihasta. Brahmastra. They're just ready to explode. Okay, thank you very much. Nikla Prabhupada ki jai. Samaveta Bhakti ki jai.